My name is Tyton Brunner. I'm a doctoral candidate at Pennsylvania Western University Global Online in the Health Science and Exercise Leadership Program. I want to thank you for tuning into this podcast where we discuss challenges, resources, and strategies for foster youth navigating higher education. My personal journey through the foster care system has shaped my perspective, and I know firsthand the barriers that many foster youth face when pursuing their education. Through this podcast, my goal is to raise awareness, share valuable insights, and provide support for foster youth caregivers, educators, and anyone working to improve outcomes for this community. Today's episode is all about understanding the biopsychosocial model and how it applies to foster youth and higher education. A beautiful book I read a couple years ago called The Myth of Normal by Dr. Gabor Mate talks about this concept, and I've researched it within this doctoral program. And I think something that we need to understand that there's a holistic way of viewing things in this world. And when you get a chance, if you want to buy it audio or paper copy, I'm not getting paid for this. This is not something that's a promotional material for me, but I will have that book, other books, and other resources in a QR code and a link in the description after this podcast. So with that model, it gives us a holistic way of looking at human development, well-being, and success considering biological, psychological, and social influence. So let's break it down real quick, right? What is it? Main question. What is the biopsychosocial model? It was proposed by Dr. George Engel. It's a framework that recognizes in a person's experience, health, and success are influenced by three interconnected factors, right? Biological, physical health, genetic makeup, psychological, emotion, thoughts, mental health, social, relationships, environment, and access to support systems. This model is especially relevant to foster youth because it explains how childhood adversity impacts their academic and personal development. Many foster youth face challenges in all three areas, and understanding how these factors interact can help us create better interventions and support systems for this population. Now, let's specifically break it down to this model in terms of foster youth. In terms of biological, we're talking about brain chemistry, immune function, the body's response to stress. We all deal with stress, and we've all had a lot of stress since the COVID-19 era, and that goes psychologically as well. Many foster youth, they do experience early childhood trauma, and it leads to, adverse effects to their physical health. So chronic stress, it can lead to overactive stress response, increasing cortisol levels, making it harder to focus, regulate emotions, and physical health. I remember my upbringing having just that aspect of, being high stress, like you're on high alert, and the inability to focus on things, especially in grade school levels, from elementary to middle school, even high school. I didn't do well high school academically. There was a lot of things going on for me personally where, death of loved ones, etc., where I couldn't focus and my stress levels are high, and also wanting to play collegiate athletics, that stress and that, that pressure of trying to get good grades and trying to be great on the field and be in the community and anything possible to try to play collegiate football. That was my thing. I also could have played collegiate basketball and track, but football was my thing. That's what I went with. But those factors, that's huge. That's just a personal aspect for me. But when we're talking about biological, it's also the nutrition and healthcare. Those learning difficulties and those concentration issues, this is something that universities must consider. Can we do health screenings? Can we offer access to medical care? Can we offer wellness programs to support this population of foster youth? Secondly, let's dive into the psychological factors. As we know, the mind, mental health, emotions, self-esteem, resiliency. In my opinion, personal opinion, many foster youth, they're very resilient. There's things in life that they've experienced that other people may never experience. And for you to get through that, to know that you're still here, that's saying something. That's a huge thing for that population to hold on their shoulders with pride to say, hey, I've been through all these things and I'm still here. Foster youth, they also, or we also, struggle with attachment issues, trust, and if you're talking about a higher education setting, you're talking about professors, mentors, peers, I've dealt with that myself early on in my academic career. The trust factor is huge. I say that to people all the time, and I don't know if you guys or whoever's listening to this feel the same, especially if you come from a foster youth background. Trust is key. If we don't trust you, you might not see us again, even though you're trying to help with the good intentions. But if something goes on like a spidey sense in terms of trust and that's not there, you probably won't see that population of students again. They probably won't come visit you. They probably won't, seek help. Instead, they'll, be resilient, figure it out on their own. Test anxiety is also another thing psychologically, and imposter syndrome. A great story is a mentor of mine. He ran a psychological institute at a predominantly Division I university athletic program. When we talked about imposter syndrome with him, it was one of those things. He is a military veteran. They decided to enroll him in a doctorate program while he was in service, serving our country. He had said to me that he didn't feel like he belonged. And I expressed that same thing to him in the conversation where it's like, hey, I'm coming from a foster care background. Like, do I need to be here? Am I supposed to be here? And he said to me these beautiful words, and I'll never forget them. Like, you have something to offer. You have a different perspective to offer that others don't understand. I found that within this doctoral program that I have in our cohort. And our cohort is amazing. Yes, most of you guys are listening to this, and I'm just being honest and I'm being real. All you guys are awesome. Ladies, too. So I find having that understanding of my perspective with others, I've learned from them. I've grown from them, and I'm hoping and I'm sure they've grown from me and learned from me as well, especially with my background. And another point of the psychological factors, we're going to talk about depression, anxiety, PTSD. Research for me last semester, we focused on holistic ways to combat PTSD. And one thing I found was every soldier that comes back overseas, one soldier, there's 10 children in the household in America getting abused or neglected. That's horrible. I mean, think about that. Sit back and think about that. That is horrible. And the fact that the PTSD rate in foster youth as high of veterans coming back from war, like, what are we doing? How do we provide these resources for foster youth? Not only before they get to college, how do we do that in their early childhood? How do we do that in the years of development to get them to where they can actually believe that you can achieve anything you want in life? Those challenges, they do prevent students from reaching their full potential. I'm just going to be honest. That's why trauma-informed counseling, resilience workshops, and peer mentorships are essential. And when we're talking about peer mentorships, I'm going to get into a university that does a fantastic job in where they have foster youth that are older, sophomore and higher, and they mentor other foster youth through their program, and their graduation rates and retention rates are through the roof. So that's something that I have researched. I found they have a good program, and I try to, in the best way possible, incorporate a lot of those ideas in that approach with the students that I work with on this campus that have been into the foster care system. Lastly, we're going to talk about social factors. That's your environment, family structure, peer relationships, socioeconomic status. I grew up with my father. My father was older. He fought in the Korean War. Just do the math. I'm almost 40. Do the math. He's deceased. Rest in peace, Pops. He served his country. But predominantly I grew up with his mother, which was my grandmother. My biological mother passed away at my age of 1 year old. So I didn't really get to connect with her on that aspect, but my grandmother was there. I was able to recently, over the past couple years, reconnect with my mother's side of the family. and I've learned a lot of their history, and even things about my mother I didn't know. Whether it's temperament, right? Where do I get this from? Or certain, personality traits that my mother shared that I always thought I got from my dad or someone else, and I actually got them from her. So I'm very blessed. I'm very thankful that I actually had an opportunity to connect with them after 30 plus years of separation. But we'll get into that in a different episode, and that's fine. So when we're talking about the social factors, the lack of stable parental figures, financial security, it does make higher education more challenging. When you're talking about housing instability, foster youth have a high rate of homelessness. Also, beyond that, the financial aid complications. There's a lot of grants, there's a lot of scholarships for foster youth, but unless you are educated on them and know where to go, and I'm going to send these links in a QR code or where I put it on the information page of the end of this podcast that you can share with other people if you have contact with foster youth or students or any person that you know that are dealing with foster youth in that background and upbringing. Um, you got the Chaffee, the state of Pennsylvania. We have a fostering tuition waiver grant that pays for foster youth for 5 years. Uh, Recently, I would say about a week and a half ago, a young foster youth lady that I work with, she's a vet tech major, and I'm on a statewide committee with the University of University of Pennsylvania, and we connected with an organization from the state of California called fosterlove.org. And they have a scholarship specifically for foster youth that are gearing towards a vet tech program. And I just thought it was perfectly divine timing that I met with this young lady and I spoke with them about the scholarship. And then last week we actually sat down, we did the scholarship. And also the support stuff when we talk about that. We did taxes. Something that people don't think about. We sat down, I showed her how to do her taxes. But creating that wraparound service for foster youth is key, and that trust factor that that someone's here for you in the most honest aspect of your well-being and they want to see you do well. Because I've seen it, I've experienced it. So when I interact with foster youth, it's a little bit easier for me at times, but it's also a trust factor that comes to it. It's like, I understand. Let's sit down, let's talk about this. Let's move through these systematic barriers too, and even things that you may not know. And I'm going to do my best, and I try and I strive to do my best to help that population that I'm from. So, and here's the thing: without that strong support system, it does make it difficult for foster youth to stay in school. What we need is mentorship programs, like I mentioned with Western Michigan, support groups, and that financial aid assistance. Being educated, understanding where these resources are for foster youth to actually achieve the goal of crossing the stage. The National Institute of Foster Youth talk about the statistic where only 3 to 4% of foster youth graduate with a 4-year degree. I don't like that. Personally, I don't want to be a statistic. I also don't want these students to think that they have to be that statistic as well, because it's something that you can overcome with the right approach. And this is why we're talking about this model, because for how relevant it is to foster youth higher education, it's unlike any other model. It just doesn't focus on one area, such as mental health or financial aid support. It integrates multiple perspectives to create that comprehensive approach, that mind, body, spirit, that holistic approach. And this is something that I'm doing within my program here at Penn West. I read an article recently. It's from Harris et al. 2021. It's named A Review of Adverse Childhood Experiences Factors Influential to Biological, Social, and Psychological Development for Young Males of Color. And the key area of that, they call them ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences, and their impact on the young males of color. So what I found was the fact that these studies show that higher suspension rates, lower school support, and systematic barriers in education, when you combine that with childhood trauma, it leads to long-term cognitive, emotional, and physical health issues. So here we go. Now we're talking about a biopsychosocial model. Now we're talking about a population of young males. Not saying that young females not experienced either and have to go through these things, but with this study in particular, we're talking about young males. Black children make up 20% of the foster care population, even though they only represent 14% of the child population. In terms of indigenous American children, they're also overrepresented, facing significant disparities in education and mental health access. Okay. Now, when we talk about the Annie E. Casey Foundation, that is on their website. And if you go to that, and I'll share that link, it's foster care race statistics. This is something that we need to be educated on. If, like I mentioned earlier, if you're a person that's dealing with foster youth, are you a caregiver? Are you someone that is trying to make their lives better? This is something that you need to be educated on. With that being said, it's also one of those things to where how do we address these disparities? Especially, it requires that trauma informed and cultural responsive interventions. There needs to be more mentorship programs. There needs to be an increased access to mental health in schools and especially universities. But it also needs to be better educational policies. We need to reduce those systematic barriers that hold this population at such a low rate of graduation. Now, we want to apply this. It's health screenings biologically. It's nutrition programs. I know on this campus we do accommodate students with disabilities. We already have that. And psychologically, access to counseling, trauma-informed teaching, and resilience workshops. Many foster youth that I've met, and even myself, very resilient. You know how to stretch a dollar. You give me $100, give me $100. I'll stretch it for 3 weeks, right? Like, it's one of those things like how to survive. But the thing is, I don't want you to have to survive. I want you to have that ability to be safe. When you're going back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's that baseline of housing, food, security, and a place to stay. Once you have that, then you can build upon those other things in life: educational attainment, love, health, all those other things. But we need the basics. And we're also talking about the social support, mentorship programs. And that, like I mentioned earlier, that biopsychosocial model, the way Western Michigan incorporates is huge, because they do provide healthcare access, nutrition assistance, stable housing options. They offer trauma-informed counseling, peer mentorship, mental health workshops, and they've also created a beautiful community of foster youth. When I talk about that peer mentor aspect, that's what I'm saying. If someone that is going to be there, that's went through the program, they know what it's like, they know how you feel, you may have some similarities in the background of your population where you come from, whether male or female, and no matter what you identify with, you have that similar background. This holistic approach, it does, and it has helped Western Michigan with higher retention and graduation rates for foster youth. That's a comprehensive support system, and it does make a difference. So here's my final thoughts. I believe the biopsychosocial model teaches that foster youth need support in multiple levels, not just financial aid or academic resources, but mental health care, mentorship, and community support. If universities, educators, and policymakers embrace this holistic perspective, we can help more foster youth thrive in higher education. I also want to say thank you for joining me on this first episode of Foster Your Future with Tyton. In our next episode, we'll dive into addressing the needs of foster youth in higher education, looking at real solutions that can bridge the gaps in academic success. Until then, take care, stay strong, and remember, you're not alone on this journey.